Am ready. Okay. Um, it is 6 o'clock on April 1st. Welcome to the City of Boulder Planning Board meeting tonight. This is a hybrid meeting. We have 6 members of the Planning Board in attendance, um, with George Boone being absent. Um, and our first order of business, according to our agenda, is the swearing in of our new planning board member, Mason Roberts. So I believe that's done by Hella, the city attorney.
And if you already executed an oath and filed it with Amanda, then that's already taken care of.
Okay. Okay. Great. Mason is sworn in. Welcome, Mason. Okay. The next item, 1B, is nominations and elections of new planning board chair and vice chair. So we'll open the floor to nominations for chair. Okay.
I would like to nominate Mark McIntyre as chair for this year, and I'm happy to speak to my nomination at the appropriate time.
Okay. Thank you. Any other nominations for chair? Think hard. Okay. There are no other nominations for chair. Laura, would you like to speak to your nomination?
I would. So, Mark, you've been our vice chair for the past year, and I think you have served us admirably. I think you care quite a bit about process, about Robert's rules, and you also care about making sure that every planning board member is heard. And a wise person once said that the two main jobs of the planning board chair are to make sure that we conduct efficient meetings and that we effectively express the will of the planning board after a good, fair discussion. And I believe, Mark, that you have the capacity to lead us this year in doing exactly that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay.
And in the procedural steps, there's supposed to be a motion to close nominations. And it's a proper motion to close nominations, seconded, and then voted upon.
Okay.
And then after that, there would be a separate vote on the chair.
Thank you, Hella. So we're looking for a motion to close nominations.
I move to close nominations for chair.
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion? If not, we'll take a vote and I'll go. Oh, who seconded? Mason. Mason did second.
No, the motion for you to be chair.
Well, right now we're just moving
Oh.
we're voting to close nominations. I
Voting
think.
to close nominations. There we go. Thank you. You got me confused there. Okay. All right. So we're going to vote on the motion to close nominations. Laura?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
ML?
Yes.
Claudia?
Yes.
Mason?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay. The nominations have been closed, and now we are on to vote. We have one candidate. That's Mark McIntyre for chair. So we'll take a vote on that. Laura?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
ML?
Yes.
Claudia?
Yes.
Mason?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Did
So-
you vote, Mark? Did you vote?
Oh, I'm a yes. Okay.
Congratulations.
Does it matter that it wasn't seconded?
The
Nomination for chair.
The only motion you have to make is to close the nominations,
okay.
but then you just vote.
Okay. All right. Okay. Great. We want to do this right. So first, thank you for the confidence, Laura. Thank you for the nomination. And I will try to uphold I agree with the goals that you laid out, and I will try to fulfill those. And I want to emphasize that I will also be perpetually open to critique and suggestions and ways of improving. So the next item of business is nominations for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Laura for vice chair of the planning board.
I will second that. Okay. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Sure. I think we've seen Laura throughout these 3 years she's been on planning board take a leadership in keeping us organized and on task. She comes to the board with amazing skills to facilitate, and I think that we will be well served with her as a vice chair. I look forward to a successful year for you, Laura.
And since I seconded, I'll speak to that as well, and just simply say that Laura's presence, I find to be a calming and thoughtful presence that just brings people around to being their better selves. So I am really appreciative of her presence here on our board and welcome her as vice chair. So I will entertain a motion. Oh, I'm sorry. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Okay. I will entertain a motion to close the nominations for vice chair.
I move to close the nominations for vice chair.
Second.
Okay. All right. Then I'm going to, we're going to vote on Laura as the nominee for vice chair.
First
And
they
No, we're
have to
voting
vote.
on the motion.
on the motion, right. Sorry. God, boy. Okay. All right. I'm failing procedurally already tonight.
But you're taking feedback so well.
Really, really, Joey, that's like, wow, you guys want to take that one back? Okay. Anyway, this is a vote to close the nominations. Mason,
Yes.
Claudia,
Yes.
ML,
Yes.
Kurt,
Yes.
Laura,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. Okay. The nominations have been formally closed. Now, does anyone want to add anything in addition to what's been already been said about our nominee for vice chair? Okay, we will now vote for our nominee for vice chair. Mason,
Yes.
Claudia,
Yes.
ML,
Yes.
Kurt,
Yes.
Laura,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. So, all right, woo, we now have order and structure for the next year. Okay. The next item is public participation regarding anything other than item 4 on our agenda, which is the public hearing. So we will check and see if there's anyone online. There's no one in the room.
Yes, we do have a couple of folks online, and I'll read the rules of decorum real quick too
Great, thank
for
you.
public participation. If I can share my screen. Here. Oops, sorry. Okay, thank you for joining us this evening. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board and commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement processes, you can visit our website listed on the screen. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to identify themselves using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. You're in the Zoom webinar format, so at this time, if you'd like to raise your hand to participate in this portion of the meeting, you may do so by clicking on the raise hand icon in the lower toolbar. I don't see anybody on the phone. And then when we get to the public hearing item, we'll go through this again and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. And I will allow you to do so. You can also find the raise hand button in the reactions icon in Zoom. And that's it. So we'll open it up for, oh, sorry. What happened to my Zoom? Just one moment, sorry. Oh, sorry about that. Let's see. Okay, so if anybody's online that would like to speak about anything that's not on the agenda tonight, now is your time to do so. I'm not seeing any hands raised. I guess we don't
Okay.
have any hands raised at the
Great.
moment.
Thank you, Amanda.
Mhm.
And so that will end item number 2, public participation. Item number 3 is discussion of dispositions, planning board call-ups and continuations. I believe there are none. And so unless I hear otherwise, we're going to move on from that to item number 4, 4A, a public hearing and recommendation to City Council regarding proposed ordinance 8694, amending Title 4, Chapter 20, fees, Title 8, Chapter 6, public right-of-way and easement encroachments, revocable permits, leases and vacations, Title 9, Chapter 6, use standards, and Title 9, Chapter 16, definitions, Boulder Revised Code 1981, to amend the standards for wireless communications facilities and small cell facilities and setting forth related details. So that's the agenda item. We'll begin with a staff presentation, followed by clarifying questions from the board, then a second public hearing for comment on item 4A, followed by board deliberations and a motion and recommendation to council. So take it away, staff.
Great. Well, good evening, Planning Board. Charles Farrell, Planning and Development Services. Excuse me. Before we get started tonight, I wanted to introduce Jeff Solomonson. Tonight is his maiden voyage before the Planning Board. Jeff is a newer planner in our office and is working directly with Carl and his team on processing code changes. Jeff brings a wealth of experience from both the public and private sector. So we're very happy to have him aboard. You'll be seeing a lot more of him in the coming days. So that said, he'll be presenting staff's analysis tonight. So take it away, Jeff. Welcome.
All right, thank you. Hi, like I said, my name is Jeff Solmonson, City Planner with Planning and Development Services. I'm here to speak on the proposed ordinance for small cell wireless code cleanup. The purpose of this ordinance is to amend Title 4, Title 8, Chapter 6, Title 9, Chapter 6, Title 9, Chapter 16, to amend the standards for wireless communication facilities and small cell facilities. This ordinance has been drafted in response to rulings and interpretations by the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. The reasons for this ordinance are due to recent rulings from the Ninth Circuit in response to the previous FCC rulings and interpretations that I spoke of, due to the streetlight transfer from Xcel Energy to the City of Boulder, and then to be consistent with the PNDS's department goal of operational excellence. And so the question is, what is a wireless communication facility? It's many things. A wireless communication facility, as the definition there says, it includes antennas. It's the towers, the structures that they're located on, supporting equipment, all kind of encompassed there. And it can include concealment on existing buildings, small cells, either within a property or in the public right-of-way, eligible facilities requests, which are either co-locating, removal, or swapping out of equipment that doesn't increase a substantial change. equipment changes that do have a substantial change, and then towers, which are included in the definition of wireless communication facility, but are limited in our code and are not part of the scope of this code change project. So the reasons for some of this is the FCC came out with a ruling in September of 2018 with the intent to provide service to new areas. The ruling included adjusting maximum application fees, new infrastructure fees, yearly recurring fees. It provided some clarity on aesthetics for wireless, specifically small cell facilities. The big thing was that it introduced a shot clock for colocation application and new structures, and introduced the deemed approval if a application was not acted upon within the designated shot clock timeframe. So then the FCC came out with a subsequent ruling in April of 2019, clarified some more of the shot clock review time, the tolling period, which is the pausing period when a application is deemed incomplete, when that restarts, resumes, and runs, and then kind of clarified when you failed to act upon an application. Then, to add more, the FCC added another ruling in June of 2020, further clarifying the shot clock beginning, interpreted height substantial increase to existing proposed antennas, basically the distance between antennas that are proposed there, and then clarified that concealment remains from the time of the original application approval. Then another last ruling in November of 2020 determined a substantial change in excavation or deployment of a wireless facility, basically saying that any equipment on the ground is allowed 30 feet in any direction, whether it's in the right of way or any other public property, and it is not a substantial change as long as it's related to that wireless communication facility. And then kind of revise the definition of site and the treatment of a facility site in the event of a zoning change. So the state of Colorado had HB 171193 that came out in April of 2017. This was in preemption of that 2018 ruling that they knew was coming. And what it did was it aligned the state regarding wireless communication facilities by adding legal definitions and kind of the process to align with what the FCC was about to release in 2018. Another one related was just passed a couple weeks ago in March of 2025. It defines a state legislated shot clock for eligible facilities requests and macro cells, and prevents local jurisdictions from implementing permits for removal and equipment changes. I want to stress that this has not been signed by the governor into legislation, and if so, will not be active until January 1st of 2026. At the time, because this is a relatively really new bill that just came, we're focusing more on bringing the code into compliance from the existing rulings, and this is something we might have to revisit later on to see if there are further changes that might come from this ruling itself. So right now, the majority of what we're presenting to you in this ordinance is to change how wireless communication facilities are basically in our code right now. As it stands right now, you have a starting point of 2 different locations. Depending on what you're looking for, sometimes they go back on each other. It's a convoluted route depending on what type of wireless communication facility, and our code is not very clear on whether you're looking to do a concealment on an existing building, whether you're looking to do an equipment change, a small cell, whether it's in the right of way or on private property. Everything is kind of lumped together in one, and even though there are 2 code sections, they don't speak to each other right now. What we're planning in front of you right now is taking a starting point from 964F, and then depending on your route, and for example, if you're looking to do a tower, you'll find that only concealment is allowed. It'll bring you back down and then point you to your design standards and the review that you can do. And for example, if it's a small cell in the right of way, you start at that point, it'll tell you kind of what the standards of the design are. It'll loop you over to 866.5, which is specifically for small cells in the right of way, the design and the application standards, and then it'll bring you back to the section for the review. So that way the 2 major code sections that have standards and design are speaking to each other back and forth, that you understand the route of where you're supposed to go. So breaking down kind of what the specific changes are. So in section 42043, one of the main things we're looking at is clarifying the fees for wireless communication facility, because the FCC in 2018 ruled that there is a maximum that you can charge for small cells in the right of way, and for vertical infrastructure to support them, as well as how many you can apply for and the yearly fees you can charge for those small cells. In 964F, the process we're looking at is clarifying the standards for the type of wireless. Like I said, kind of directing which one you're doing, whether it is a wireless communication facility, or otherwise referred to as a macro cell, the larger one, or if you're doing a wireless communication that's a small cell, which is the smaller one. It adds language for how to direct you to the application fees. That was one thing that was missing in 964 completely, was where do you pay? You know, where are these fees located? There was existing language in 866.5, but that is specifically for small cell in the right of way. This clarifies the review procedure for the different types, whether it's an eligible facility request, small cell facility or equipment change, and then it adds language to clarify what is a complete application, what the shot clock regulations are per type, the notification requirements for completeness, and then to direct you to 866.5 if it is a small cell in the right of way. Going to 866.5, as I just mentioned, some of the changes is adding some of the definitions that are already existing in Title IX to that section as they are mentioned in that section. So it's just having the sections communicate with each other. Another one is modifying the definition, because right now it lists its own definition of small cell facility, and adding that under the wireless communication facility umbrella, which covers it. And then it removed some vague application process language in 866.5 and directed you to 964, which has the substantial talking about completeness of the application, the tolling of the shot clock, what type of shot clock you need, everything like that. So with the FCC rulings, the changes we're looking at in 964F is updating the excavation and deployment, as I said, from the 2020 ruling that ruled how far out you can go without considering a substantial change. And then they also clarified a further substantial change definition, which we've done in our code to reflect that. In 866.5, looked at modifying the small cell facilities definition for the mounting height per the federal code definition, and then clarifies the maximum size is 28 cubic feet, which is allowed per the federal code right now. That one's a little bit of an interesting thing, because the state of Colorado bill that came out in 2017 in preemption to the 2018 ruling now clarifies it as 17, which was at the time. However, the FCC further ruled that they're allowed up to 28 cubic feet. So this would align us in line with federal code, not necessarily with state code, which is already now outdated. So with these changes, staff recommends that Planning Board recommend to City Council adopt this ordinance, because it will clarify the fees, application, and review process for wireless communication facilities and small cell facilities, and it will align Boulder's requirements with federal rulings, interpretations, legislation, state legislation, and it will also unify us with other Front Range communities such as Greeley and Fort Collins, who have updated their code to reflect these changes. And then it'll also have the applicable policies from the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan. And so with that, I have the recommended motion for approval, and I will answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. That was great. And welcome to our staff. And we need more of that, like straightening those crisscrossed lines. So, so thank you very much. So we'll now open it up to questions from the board.
All right, I'll start with a big context question that'll maybe help ground our discussion. Thanks for the presentation, Jeff. I was curious how many small cell facilities are currently in the city of Boulder, and are there any trends in where they tend to be located?
From my understanding, from other staff members, I think there has been 2 permitted in the last 5 years. Total. So there's not very many right now, but the anticipation is that ones are coming due to the streetlight transfer over. That there was a lot of interest from those coming over that they could be placed in existing light poles.
Okay, and so that becomes easier now if the city is the owner of those poles as opposed to these companies having to deal with Excel. Is that the?
Correct.
Okay.
That was my understanding.
Okay, thank you. So if there's only two so far, my second question is kind of moot because that is if we've had any notable issues with applications or construction so far. One other thing I'm curious about is, do we have any specific rules governing the placement of poles, facilities, towers, et cetera, in the public right of way? So specifically, I'm thinking about with regard to city sidewalks and the like. So if somebody wants to come in and install a new one of these poles that we've seen in some of the staff presentation materials, where are they allowed to put those in the public right of way?
Well, currently the code was updated in preemption of the 2018 ruling back then. Right now there is a 600-foot separation between small cells that is existing in the code. So if there was a location where it wasn't, where there was 600 feet away and there wasn't existing infrastructure, because our code really preempts people to use existing vertical infrastructure, whether that is a existing street light or a traffic light, some sort of existing. If they can find an area where they're 600 feet away from another small cell where there is no other infrastructure that can be used, they would be allowed to put up a new monopole. With this, like I said, this is all coming from our existing code, but then they have height restrictions depending on how far they are from different residential zones, and then commercial zones. They all have a tiered height approach of how high they can build.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I was mostly curious, like, if they were going to be putting in a new pole, for example, like, does that have to follow the same rules of placement as, say, a streetlight pole or any other utility pole? Like,
yes,
if
they build
can you
a
put
new,
it down in the middle of a sidewalk, for example, or do you have to put it, a certain
Yeah, if
distance from a passageway?
yeah, if there were no other options available for them to co-locate on an existing structure, yeah, they could be allowed to put it up, but it does have to meet the same color and design standards as existing streetlights and traffic lights and stuff like
Okay, thank you.
Sure, I have a few questions and welcome, Jeff. And the first one I think is a follow-up to, well, they're sort of both follow-ups to Claudia's questions. Just so that I'm clear, if there are only two, I'm aware of two things that I think of as like 5G towers. One is on Iris at 25th or something, and one is on Balsam by the Alpine Balsam site. Those are the two that exist, as far as you know?
I'm not sure, because the two that I was that staff had informed me about were actual small cells located in the right of way. So if those are particular ones that are in the right of way, there are existing macro cells that are larger than 3 cubic feet, as the small cell definition is, that are located throughout the city, but most of them are concealed onto existing structures or existing infrastructure.
And I know that on Iris, there is a monopole that is just a small cell facility.
Right. Okay. Okay. Great. That's interesting that those are apparently the only two then. Going to our packet on page 13, there's a definition of telecommunications provider, and it seems very broad. And it seems like it might include, for instance, an internet cafe or some other place where you have paid Wi-Fi, for example, because it just says it provides wireless connectivity, wireless communication service or something like that for payment. So I'm just trying to understand what the real legal breadth of that is, and are we covering more than we really want to be covering with that?
What page number?
It's page 13 of 19 of the packet. It's in red, the definition of, it's the definition in black of telecommunications provider. Telecommunications provider shall mean a person that provides telecommunications service or services, with the exception of cable services and aggregators of telecommunication services, as those terms are defined by federal law. Telecommunications provider does not mean a person or business using antennas, support towers, equipment and/or buildings used to transmit high power over the air broadcast of AM and FM radio, etc. And then telecommunications services shall mean the offering of telecommunications for a fee directly to the public or to such classes of users as to be effectively available directly to the public, regardless of the facilities used. So that's why I was just trying to think, well, what does that cover? And it seems like, again, an internet cafe, for example, would be covered.
Carl Geiler, Senior Policy Advisor. I mean, I've always read this like this was just a traditional like cell phone company operator that, you know, puts up those antenna on buildings that get the cell service to work. I think in this case, we're focusing more on the 5G type, you know, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but on those kind of providers that are covered by the state legislation. So I don't know that we looked at these definitions as something that we needed to update, but we could take a closer look at that.
Okay, maybe something to think about, whether that could be narrowed to be more focused on what we're really trying to address here. Yeah, great.
And a lot of the definitions are based on federal law,
Oh.
and in particular telecommunication services and so forth. Those terms have been in the code for a long time, and we haven't seen any issues with that. And maybe also because I suspect that federal law, although I can't tell you off the top of my head, limits it in that way, but also the other requirements that apply will make it very clear that we're not talking about an internet cafe.
Okay. Okay. That's great. Then, can I keep going?
Yeah.
I was unclear on this 30-foot rule, which I saw in the code, but I wasn't exactly sure how it applied. Can you describe that about the excavation up to 30 feet out for construction of towers and such?
So the excavation deployment is part of a base station. It's another term I'm throwing out there too, but a base station is essentially the area on the ground where transmission equipment services the antennas, whether it be in a small cell on a monopole or located on a building, or, you know, in other jurisdictional like instances on a tower. And so what that excavation deployment is saying is that if a person needs to go out 30 feet with, you know, to connect to a line to essentially to provide service, you know, whether it's electrical or some sort of utilities to that site, it's not considered a substantial change to the site. So they're basically allowing a 30-foot footprint around the tower to provide service to without it considering a substantial change.
Really, I guess my question then is, can a telecommunications service provider or whatever, can they just sort of start digging out to a 30-foot radius with impunity then, or is there some kind of, is there still some sort of permit that they need to get?
Well, this would be with them getting all the applicable permits that they would need. You know, if it's in the right of way, it would be a revocable right of way permit. It would be an electrical permit to dig there. There's an assortment of 5 different permits that they would need to go through in the regulatory process to put a small cell in the right of way.
Okay, they can't just start digging up the street for
No.
no reason. Okay, good. Sounds good. Then sorry. On page 12 of the packet, there's a definition of small cell facility, and it looks like we updated that. And just the wording is a little confusing to me because it says small cell facility means any of the following, and then there's a paragraph, and then it says, a wireless communications facility that meets both of the following qualifications. And then there are three things. There are actually four things. And they're linked. There's an and there's an or. I can't figure out how to parse this and what the both refers to.
Are you referring to the section 4A and B that delineate between new wireless communication facilities and the eligible facilities and small cell requests?
This is a change to 866.5, section B, definitions. And it's the definition of small cell facility. And it's just about the wording. I think before the both kind of made sense but then we added another thing in there. I don't understand how to connect these things. with
We
the both
actually,
of
yeah,
them.
we actually have a consultant online who is an attorney who specializes in telecommunications law, Brandon Dittman. He raised his hand to help answer this question. And Brandon, I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself or if Amanda has to help with that. There he is.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so my name is Brandon Dittman again. I'm from Wilson Williams Fellman Dittman. I help consult on the code. I can help answer a number of questions about definitions and, interaction with the federal laws. And I will say that the small cell facility definition, as unwieldy as it is again, an artifact of the FCC's regulations and what they say a small cell is. And so, some of the weirdness of this, we can attribute directly to the FCC and how they've described a small cell. I do think that the red additions, for the facilities or mount on structures and so on and so forth, that may have actually been intended for a substantial change rather than a small cell. But all the rest of that is what the Federal Communications Commission deems as a small cell, as unwieldy as that definition may be.
Okay. Well, maybe you can just check that over then and make sure that that really reads the way it's supposed to.
Kurt, can I just clarify, is your question about the use of the word both meets both of the following qualifications, and then it has 4 separate paragraphs that follow the word both qualifications?
That was what prompted
Yeah.
my confusion
Okay.
initially, yes.
So maybe the word both should be all rather than both, but because it seems like there's more than 2 things there. Is that what you're saying?
Right. But
Okay.
in addition, there's a paragraph and then there's another, or a section, and then there's another section that ends with an and then the
Yeah.
next section ends with an or. And
So
It does seem
how does all this fit
convoluted.
together?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's a great question. And the way to think about this is there's really 2 different ways to become a small cell. The first one is, each antenna is located inside an enclosure for no more than 3 cubic foot, and the primary equipment closure is no larger than 28 cubic feet. So that's one way you become a small cell. The other way is you're a micro wireless facilities. That one really is an or between those 3 things. And I think, just maybe the way it was said, in the way it's laid out more so, it creates the confusion. And it also has to be, a personal wireless communications facility as that is defined by the Telecommunications Act. And so I think really more, I think the formatting may lead to the confusion more so than anything else. But what it's saying is there's basically 2 different ways to become a small cell, but you, in all cases, must be also a personal wireless communications facility.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, yeah, if there's a way to clarify that, that would be great. I'm a strong believer in the code being clear enough that someone who, is thinking about it hard at least can read it and understand it without having to go and ask, bother staff and figure out what the heck this means and so on. So great. Okay. Can I ask one more question?
Please,
Which-
I think these are fascinating catches you've found here. So go ahead.
So the last question really is another follow-up on what Claudia was raising. And so I think about the interaction between our small cell siting practices, I guess, and the design and construction standards and our code, especially regarding sidewalks, as Claudia raised. So if we think about that, the tower by Alpine Balsam, which that is, so there's a 4-foot attached sidewalk, and then there's about a 4-foot spacing inside the sidewalk, and then there's the tower. Well, my understanding is that when Alpine Balsam is redeveloped, that sidewalk is going to get rebuilt. It's in bad shape anyhow. And our standards say we should have a detached sidewalk with an 8-foot tree lawn. So that will put the sidewalk going exactly where that tower is, which is unfortunate. Obviously, when we build the sidewalk, we're not going to move the tower. That would be super expensive. And so the sidewalk will have to be routed around it. So really the question is, especially in cases like that where we have a non-compliant sidewalk, is there a way to, and I know that this gets beyond the exact intent of the changes that we've got here, but I'm just wondering if there's a way to require that these towers and other facilities be sited in such a way that when the sidewalks especially are brought up to our current standards, that the whatever facility it is not interfere with the sidewalk in that location. Does that make sense?
Yeah, maybe we'll defer to Brandon on that firstly.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think there's a couple things to think about there. Number one, you mentioned that facility can't be relocated. And I wouldn't give up on that just yet, because if that facility is indeed in the public right of way, it's the provider's responsibility to relocate that facility at their cost. And so it may make sense to relocate that facility if a public project such as a sidewalk expansion or roadway expansion requires it. So that's one thing. But secondly, in the broader point about how are these facilities interacting with our designs for sidewalks and our standards for sidewalks and other types of landscaping standards and so on and so forth. That's all part of the review process. One of the things we're going to have in addition that's not in the code is a operational design standard, which include things like ADA compliance, setbacks from curb lines, those details, which staff that is reviewing these applications, will be judging these against. And so there is the ability to regulate that and making sure that it does comply with whatever the city standards are. And the one I think we see most frequently as being an issue, or at least we did originally when these facilities first started getting deployed, was ADA compliance. It wouldn't be clearance, if it was being put on an existing sidewalk, essentially. But the providers have gotten better about that. We've also gotten better at reviewing applications for that issue specifically. And so we can certainly, build some of that into the review process.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you very much. And just trying to think about not creating future conflicts, because some of our other policies do make it difficult to really bring things up to our current, especially design and construction standards. So I would appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, great. Go ahead, Mason.
So you started talking about the review process. Is that something that's coming down the road for us to opine on?
The review process is in the ordinance. So right now, any wireless facility is reviewed as a conditional use, which is an administrative review. So that's a staff level review. So it sets it up for the public right of way and private property.
But the standards that are used in those reviews, I guess that's what I'm asking about.
Yeah, the ordinance includes those standards for each.
And if you look at the ordinance, it doesn't actually contain all of the standards. Some of it is left out. It mostly shows the changes that we're making, but there are standards in the code already. And we do actually have a sidewalk standard too for how far it should be clear and that there should not be unreasonable obstruction of pedestrian way.
Just to follow up on that, yeah, I guess my concern is we avoid obstruction of the current sidewalk, but if the current sidewalk is not in the right place, according to the DCS, then we're not always really thinking about where the sidewalk will be in the future, or, you know, the sidewalk width or whatever the standard may be. That's primarily my concern.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I think there's some authority for the city to move or to ask for it to be moved to make sure that there's continuing passageway.
Claudia?
I have another question in the vein of what Kurt has been asking. And that is for some permitted projects, including a lot of the larger ones that we review here as a board, the city requires applicants to bring the right-of-way up to current code or into compliance with applicable plans, for example, by adding missing links to sidewalks. Do we have any such requirements when these small cell poles or other utility poles are installed or maintained? And do we have an ability to add such requirements if we don't have them?
I mean, with any application, we route the applications to a number of different reviewers, including the engineers. So they would have to look at it for whether a sidewalk clearance issue exists or whether the sidewalk has to be updated. So they might identify it as part of that administrative review, and they would have to, you know, there might be a right-of-way requirement, a right-of-way permit to make those updates. But it really depends on the scope of the project. You know, is it something that requires site review or, you know, a building permit, but the engineers have their eyes on it to know what updates would need to be made.
Mason?
Sorry, just one more clarifying question. Just want to make sure that I'm reading this correctly. Those applications that are not in the public right of way follow the same application process and review, correct?
Correct.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, great. I think we'll go to our public hearing now.
Sure.
You can check online and see if we have no one in the room, and see if anyone has been with us other than Brandon online.
Yes. If you're joining us online this evening and you'd like to speak about this item, now is the time to go ahead and raise your hand.
Okay.
Not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, great. So I'm going to close the public hearing, and we're going to move on to board deliberations and eventually a motion. So as far as board deliberations go, does anyone, before we get into the motion, does anyone have any feelings, thoughts, or concerns they want to express? Okay. Oh, Kurt?
Yeah, just to confirm, so I raised a few sort of detailed points about the wording and so on. And so you'll have a chance to look at this before it goes to council. Great, thank you.
Okay, great. All right, we don't seem to have a lot of deliberation, so would the chair will entertain a motion by anyone.
I will make the motion. I move that Planning Board recommend that City Council adopt the proposed ordinance amending Title IV, Chapter 20, fees Title 8, Chapter 6, Public Right-of-Way and Easement Encroachments, Revocable Permits, Leases and Vacations, Title 9, Chapter 6, Use Standards, and Title 9, Chapter 16, Definitions, BRC 1981, to amend the standards for wireless communications facilities and small cell facilities and setting forth related details.
I'll second.
Great. So we have a motion made and a second. Now, would anyone care to speak to the motion?
I'll just say briefly that this seems like a pretty straightforward, although complicated, code cleanup, and I want to give my thanks to staff for doing the heavy lifting to make sure that we are in compliance with these recent rulings, state legislation, and in alignment with our other Front Range communities. So thank you so much to staff who have done this important and I'm sure fairly tedious job. So thank you so much.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. And I'll give a little bit of kudos to the board, and in particular, Kurt, for a careful reading of some tough going here. So that's appreciated. So, okay, we'll move to a vote, and I'll begin with Laura.
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
ML?
Yes.
Claudia?
Yes.
Mason?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay, so it's a 6-0 vote. Congratulations on your first City of Boulder hearing, and you know, that went smoothly. So, yeah.
It'll never be that way ever again.
Don't underestimate us, Charles.
And-
Thank you, Jeff.
And it's before 7, so that's also maybe a record. So, yeah, that's it's all downhill from here. So, okay. Thank you to staff for that. And now we are going to move on to matters, and I'm going to save matters from the planning board until we'll first ask for matters from the planning director or representative and city attorney. Any matters from?
I have a matter, and it's to respond of some questions that you, Mark, sent out to us related to when an applicant knowingly or inadvertently provides information or testimony during a quasi-judicial public hearing that influences your decision. And I already asked you for a little clarification during the agenda meeting, and you were particularly interested in if false information or incorrect information is provided. And the consequences or enforcement options are there in Title 5 of the Boulder Revised Code. Title 5 sets forth violations and general offenses. And one of the offenses set forth there is to intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly make a false statement in an application or in support thereof. So that would include making such a statement during a public hearing. It doesn't include inadvertently providing such information. And then for it to be prohibited, it has to be material to the application or disposition thereof. So if it's just some side fact that doesn't really relate to the review criteria, then that also wouldn't be a violation.
I'm sorry. You said if
it was just some kind of background fact that doesn't really relate to the review criteria. Let's say there was a statement about when the building was first constructed that's proposed to be modified in an application, and the year it was constructed was wrong. That doesn't really matter for your review of the review criteria. So if that was provided incorrectly, that wouldn't be a violation of the code. It really relates to facts that are material to your decision. And this is enforced through the city's enforcement officers, and could be through the police or another enforcement officer of the city. And it would be pursued in the municipal court as a criminal violation.
So it sounds like from what you said, what I got from that is that the statement, whether it's made by someone participating in a public hearing or an applicant, that makes a statement that is material to the review criteria, that is
Mhm.
something that could be investigated and could be an offense.
Correct.
If it's something of interest to the board, but is not directly related to the review criteria, even if it influenced our decision, that would not be.
It shouldn't influence your decision if
If
it's not
part of,
related to the
right,
review criteria.
right, thank you. Right,
Yeah.
okay,
And yeah, and because it would be prosecuted, it would require proof beyond a reasonable doubt, as in other criminal cases. I have to tell you that I don't recall any case ever going forward.
right.
But it is a violation under our code.
Kurt, go ahead.
And so the only remedy, well, there is no remedy in terms of, for instance, the site review, right? If someone makes a false statement to us, an applicant, for example, and that can be proven in a court of law, then they can be, get charged and penalized that way. But there's no mechanism for sort of doing the site review again or something like
Yeah,
that.
thanks for asking that clarifying question. In that particular code section that sets forth the violation also says if there's a conviction, well, actually, it doesn't say if there's a conviction, but it says that, actually, what does it say exactly? Let me look at it. It says the city manager may deem any approval of such application void. And my interpretation of that is that there has to be a conviction. Otherwise, we're lacking due process, that there's a right to a hearing and so forth too, where somebody may want to defend themselves.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Laura?
If there were a conviction, what kind of penalties would there be? I'm assuming we're not talking about putting people in jail. We're talking about maybe a fine, or like what kind of criminal, what kind of remedies would there be if there were
In
a
general,
conviction?
in municipal court, I think the maximum fine is around $2,600. There could be jail time. That is a potential penalty. But yeah, that's the maximum fine.
Other questions? I have a few more, but. Oh, Kurt.
So we're talking about 5519. Was that the section?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. And so it talks about reckless, no person shall recklessly make any false statement.
Mhm.
Legally, what is the difference between making a false statement and recklessly making a false statement?
Well, it's defined.
Oh, it
And
is? Okay.
it's a little bit difficult, those are the mens rea in a criminal offense. There is, I guess, the mental states that may have to be proven in a criminal case: intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, or negligently. So each of those terms are defined. And for recklessly, it states means consciously to disregard a substantial and unjustifiable risk that a result will occur or that a circumstance exists. So essentially, consciously disregarding a substantial or unjustifiable risk that the fact might be false you're presenting.
Okay, great, thank you.
It's a mouthful.
So even though we've modified our call-up criteria, someone from the public can still call up an item that comes before the planning board
Yes.
for review. Can someone from the public who, I guess this might require standing. My question is, can someone from the public make a complaint that based on a land use decision that they felt was, had a falsehood somewhere within it, okay? Reckless or not. So the planning board or the staff decides not to act, but can someone from the public file a complaint? And would that be a civil complaint, or would that actually begin this,
Yeah,
the court
someone
case?
from the public could file a complaint with the city, and the city would then investigate whether they thought there was probable cause to actually, start a criminal case and file charges.
Mhm. And so it's probably a bad idea to refer to anything specific in this discussion. Is it a bad idea to refer to specifics, members from the public that have come before us recently with a complaint about, sheds being built, or what was presented to us for an approval of a land use decision? Can I ask questions about that, or should I not?
I would avoid bringing anything up that has a pending application.
That has a pending application. Okay, great. So we actually have some things that might be pending. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. All right, that's helpful to me, and from a clarification standpoint. The one other thing I think I asked later in my email is if an applicant has presented us, staff or the planning board, with information that is subsequently proven to be incorrect, can we take that into account in a future decision from regarding a different application from the same applicant?
So generally, the future decision has to be based on the review criteria and the evidence that's in front of you and part of the record for that particular decision. Past actions and past applications are likely not going to be relevant to that. I don't want to, exclude that maybe there is some circumstance where it might be relevant, but really what you're doing at the second hearing is looking at the application that's in front of you then, and whether the review criteria are met for that particular application.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's very helpful. Okay. Yeah.
Just as a follow-up, what about in the extremely rare instance where staff perhaps made a factual error in an application and that impacted our decision, and it is later determined to be that staff were the ones who made the error? Is there any remedy for that, rehearing or reopening an application?
Only if the appeal process is still ongoing and under those circumstances. So call up decision, or a third party could file a Rule 106 review action in court, but that's really limited to once a decision is final in the city, then you have to file that action within 30 days.
Thank
so
you.
It's not a very long time period.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Great. Anything else from our city attorney under matters?
No, that's it.
Okay, great. Charles, anything from you as point?
We just wanted to check in on the draft retreat agenda and make sure everybody had an opportunity to review it, make sure everybody was okay with it. We were going to cover the item that we just covered with Hella as part of the retreat, but we can go ahead and take that off. Give ourselves a little bit more breathing room in the agenda. But other than that, just wanted to check in on it, make sure everybody was okay with the subject matter.
ML?
Hi, Charles. I do have a question under the area plans. So there's not a lot of specificity. So history and purpose of area plans, will we have the planners that worked on those plans there so that we can more carefully understand the intent of the plans to get a sense of, okay, how are these intended to be used?
You'll have Brad, myself, and KJ there. So I think between the
KJ.
three of us, we should be able to
Okay,
speak intelligently
Perfect.
to area plans.
perfect. That's my question. And will there be Did I see that legal input into how we use
Yes.
the area plan and what its weight is?
Under area plans on the agenda, the third bullet is really the site review criterion that talks about the applicability of area plans in the site review process in the legal context.
So we'll have a legal person there to
I'm
flesh that out
thinking
for
it's going to
us.
be Hella.
Hella, we're gonna have such a good time.
Yes, then I think both Laurel and I will probably be there.
Okay.
Yeah, that just has created such complexity for us that I'm really looking forward to knowing where's the line in the sand. Because it seems like we don't really know where that is. So excellent. Thank you so much.
Laura.
First, thank you, Charles and
Yeah.
Brad in absentia for putting together this retreat agenda. Excellent job trying to get everything in there that we had asked about. My question is about the last item. We had wanted to talk about how that we have these trends for retail and office space in the city. And this 15-minute item looks to me like an overview of what data exists and where to find it, like on Boulder Today, and how that data was gathered, which is super useful. I am hoping that if we don't have time in this retreat, that we could actually have a staff presentation about what those trends are, so that we can, as a board, have a discussion about what it means for us to understand. We get different input from people saying we are way overbuilt on retail. And then other people say, well, it's not that we're overbuilt on the amount of retail, it's the type of retail spaces and what they are being, the cost of them, and that type of thing. Or are there some types of retail that do well and some types of retail that don't? So I'm hoping we can do a deeper dive at some point, even if it doesn't fit into this agenda, because I think that would really help inform our discussions about mixed use.
Would the board like to talk less about plan implementation, CIP, that kind of thing, and maybe a little bit more about demographics? Or are we feeling like that's kind of a separate item for a separate night?
I think they're both really important. And in fact, I think while we have more control over the site review criteria and how we fulfill that in terms of mixed use, et cetera, on the other hand, the CIP is an area that we actually don't approve or disapprove, but is really big, and where big changes are made. So I think they're both important. I'm not ready to shortchange one or the other. Yeah.
I'm wondering if we would all be willing to consider starting the program earlier, keeping the 5 o'clock gather dinner time, but maybe having half an hour of sort of free form time and then starting the program at 5:30, just to give us a little more time, because boy, this is a lot to cover. I will say that when Mark and I drew up this list of proposed topics, the intent wasn't necessarily to cover all of them in the retreat. It was a list of ideas, and I really appreciate that you are trying to fit them all in, because they are all important. And luckily, we just took care of one. But I think if we could manage to eat and think at the same time or something, that might be helpful.
So start the actual proceedings at 5:30?
That's just a suggestion from
Okay,
me.
that's great. We'd be happy to.
Show thumbs up.
And then that might give us a little bit more time on the back end then. Okay.
And can I just ask just a question about the timing on CIP and budget? When does City Council consider that? When does that come to us and then go to City Council?
Summertime.
Summertime. So if we had to move something, for me, I feel more urgency to understand the retail situation, because that may impact any site review coming before us between now and summer. So I would prefer to move up the discussion about retail. And then if something has to get compressed or moved to later in the year, I would say CIP and budget discussion, if that is amenable to the rest of the board.
So then would it make sense to do the last item, Boulder Today review, before the CIP? I mean, we could just say, we're not going to try to deal with the CIP tonight and give quite a bit more space, because even like half an hour on the area plans, I'm just worried that that's not going to be enough. Or we could at least put the CIP thing at the end and kind of get a feel for how things are going and postpone it if need be.
Yeah, I would be fine with either. I mean, if it gives staff more time to prepare on area plans and fewer things to juggle, I'd be fine with moving the CIP and budget agenda item to a future meeting. Or we could just put it at the end of the agenda, knowing that it could get extended into a future meeting.
That sounds good. And Laura, just so I'm clear, so you'd like information just on retail trends right now?
For me, that's the big one, the retail and maybe also the office space. But, you know, we've had so much pushback on mixed use from different applicants, both developers of housing who don't want to include retail or office space, and also developers of industrial who don't want to include different kinds of mixed use in their development. So just understanding the economics of, you know, where some of that pushback is coming from, and then this whole idea that we hear over and over again of people arguing about whether we are overbuilt on retail, especially in the post-COVID era, and with the changing nature of work. Retail and office space may look different in the future, and are we asking for too much of that to be built, and how much of it is going unused, or is it just we're building the wrong types? So it's not exactly clear to me how much of that space is vacant, how that compares to past trends, and is it just certain types of that those components that are going vacant? Is that helpful, Charles?
It is. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
sure.
Sorry, I was taking notes.
Yeah, ML.
On the Boulder Today review, you know, one of the things that I think comes to mind, and especially from the public perspective, is how are we doing with our housing goals? Because we approve these big housing, adding floors, adding density, and we don't know whether it's hit, what targets it's hitting. So it would be, I think it would be nice to have an understanding that, okay, we talk about inclusionary housing money is going to go over here to provide affordable housing, but what about the housing that's actually getting built? What demographic is that serving? Because I think there's a disconnect between what the public anticipates or sees. They think more housing is great, there'll be more affordability, but we don't know what demographic these projects are hitting. Is there a way to get that kind of information?
I would have to check with our partners in housing as to what the availability of that is. Something tells me all that data exists on the Housing and Human Services dashboard on their website, which every time I look at it, I'm really surprised at how much information is on there. But I can look into it. That might be more conversation than we have time for.
So the Boulder Today review, where is that data coming from?
That was 500 participants across the community.
Okay, so it's a particular survey.
Exactly, yeah.
And
That was
so-
just done recently for the comprehensive plan.
Okay, so you were asking, I think at the beginning, to Laura, whether the mixed use interests were the only one. What other options are there? What other data is in there that we might want to include if housing isn't in that?
It's everything from school enrollment, education, diversifying population, typical, you know, breakouts in the community by gender, age groups, things like that. But I could see if maybe there's just some stats we could at least pull down for the conversation.
Is there information on vacancy of apartments?
Yeah, not in the Boulder Future
Not in
data
that
set.
Boulder Today review. It just seems that there seems to be a black hole right? That uh, statements are made about housing, and I've never seen any data to validate, are we creating the right kind of housing? And where are we in our housing goals?
So Amel, would it be useful to think about it in terms of, we have set some goals for how much affordable housing we want to have, like what percentage of our housing we want to have affordable by, I think it's 2035. And what percentage of that should be middle income versus low income, and maybe just get an update on those trends. It might be harder to think about it in terms of, what's been built during a certain time period, but that affordable housing dashboard that Charles talked about, it would be nice to kind of pull out and put in front of us for us to all look at the same time and discuss how are we doing at meeting our affordable housing goals, and how's that money being broken out? The money that goes into the inclusionary housing program, how's it being spent and what's being built?
And would we have information on how much of the affordable housing was added due to height variances? In other words, not by right, but that we're trying to get more inclusionary housing by making these changes at the site review process. I'm just curious what the relationship is between the housing that is getting built and how are the modifications that are being granted impacting our affordability coffers. Is it a big number? Is there a big amount of affordable housing that is coming out of this added density that we're putting into the city, or is it a relatively small number? I wouldn't have a sense of that, but I wonder if we would know, because these are the things we have to think about, right, when we're granting a height modification or changing the FAR or removing setbacks, making things more dense, is, well, what are we getting
This is
on the other end?
Cash in lieu.
Yeah.
No, I know,
in
but how
most
does that
cases.
relate to how much housing is being provided in that?
So it's really more the relationship between the cash in lieu dollars and where that's going.
Yes. Thank you for putting it in a line item, Charles.
No problem. Okay, I'll see what we can do.
Yeah, I've always been impressed when asked, whether it's Kurt Fernhaber or someone, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name right now, who administers our inclusionary housing funds. What's that? Sloan, right, thank you. Or someone from BHP in the past, but in the midst of a meeting. And so to ML's point, this is all really interesting questions, and versus anecdotally, well, $100,000 in the inclusionary housing fund yields, a leveraged unit on the ground of low-income housing, et cetera. So anyway, I think these are really interesting questions, and I think we have a lot of good resources, and whether or not it gets done in a 15 or 20-minute segment in our retreat is it may be another question.
So that's my concern, is I feel like that could be a 3-hour conversation.
Right.
And maybe that's something that we can, if we have a light agenda, we can bring somebody in from housing. These are all things that they can speak fluently in. It would take
Right.
me and my staff time to do that research.
Right. Yeah.
But that's
So-
certainly something that we could tee up for a light agenda.
And I think just having, as you said, some bullets around here is, we've, in the last, however, the conglomerate of years ago, the height modifications have resulted in X number of affordable units. Because I think that that's one of the primary reasons we give height modifications. So it'd be nice to know the consequence, where it lands.
Okay. So we're still in matters, and does anyone from the board have any additional matters? I'm about to bring one up, but does anyone, I want to give anyone else an opportunity first? Okay. As chair, I want to take a moment for us to discuss what I think has been neglected, and not in a bad way, but it's just, I don't think we've addressed the opportunity that the matter section allows us, and also our scheduled debrief. At every meeting, we have time for matters from the board. And I think almost most meetings, the board doesn't have much of a matter to discuss. Sometimes staff brings things to us. And I would like us to make potentially better use of both of those agenda segments. And I've talked with some of you about things that we can do procedurally to improve our meetings. And I'd like the debrief time to be a time that we actually debrief a little bit and feel comfortable in saying, wow, that felt really great tonight, or, I thought this didn't go real well, or whatever it might be. And it doesn't have to be tears and touchy-feely, but I do want us to be able to have a debrief and be able to comment or bring up concerns that maybe weren't directly related to an applicant or an application, but something that concerns us, or we need clarification on, or whatever. So I have a couple things, but I would like to offer the opportunity now under matters for anyone to, if you've had something you've been thinking about ways we could improve process, procedure, our relationship to the staff or to the applicant, now would be a good time. And if anyone has things they'd like to put forth, I'd sure love to hear them. Mason.
This might be more a question for staff, but can we get presentations before the meeting? I know you guys are probably working up to the last minute on them, which is totally fine. I can in the parking lot. Yeah, understandable that they won't necessarily always match.
In most cases, we the day of, we have a pretty firm idea of like the presentation being in final draft form. That's something that we could consider getting, if that's helpful for the board, getting presentations out earlier.
Yeah, it would be helpful for me. I mean, reading through the packet is great. There's a lot of awesome detail included in our packets, but often it's just more efficient for me to like go through a presentation and then focus on areas.
As long as there's an understanding that they are a work in progress until we kind of hit the dais. So.
And I want to caution that if it's a quasi-judicial item, you do need to go through the actual memo and be sure that you know all of the facts.
Yep.
Kurt.
Just to follow up on that, if it is quasi-judicial and there's a difference between the presentation that was given to us and the presentation that is made in the meeting, is that problematic? Because we could have been studying materials that are not presented in the meeting.
Yeah, I think if staff's going to go ahead and share presentations ahead of time, then, and I'm assuming we're talking about staff presentations because we do also have applicant presentations and so forth.
Yeah.
But that it would also be shared on the board, on the city website, where other things are shared that are submitted.
Yeah, great.
So that makes me a little bit more nervous, because then we're not sharing the final. And I think we've had these conversations in the past that, we're going to be posting something that might not be the final version, and then there's version control issues for the record. But so that gives me a little bit of pause.
And so having been on TAB and other boards, many times those other boards do send their presentations in advance, but it's not a quasi-judicial hearing.
Right.
And I think that that is Yeah, I mean, that's a logistical item that needs to be taken into account.
We can certainly give it some thought.
Laura?
I have a few, but first I want to say, Mark, for me tonight, there were not enough tears. So I'll look to you to lead the way on that in the future.
Okay.
Okay, so a few things I've been thinking about in terms of just solidifying our process. And partially this is coming from, thinking about it as a facilitator. So one thing that I think would be really helpful for anybody who's chairing a meeting is to have a facilitation plan in front of you as chair to check off, not just the agenda, but there may be things that don't appear on the agenda that you want to make sure you do, like a check-in for a quasi-judicial hearing, asking for ex parte communications or disclosure of conflict of interest to make sure that we go through that step every time for public transparency. So that's one thing I would want to see happen every time consistently. For site reviews, the last couple that we've done have been pretty complicated in terms of thinking about the criteria. And I think it would be very helpful if for every quasi-judicial hearing, staff are prepared to pull up our criteria on the screen for us to look at while we're discussing, does this project meet this particular criterion or not? So if we as a board are prepared to cite the specific criterion and we can look at it on the screen in front of us while we're talking about it, I think that'd be very helpful. Same thing with an area plan. If we're talking about something from an area plan, let's get that area plan language pulled up on the screen, not just for us, but also for the public and for the applicants. Because I took to heart the comments that we got that our process was, I forget what the word was, it wasn't Byzantine, but it was some similar term.
Kafkaesque.
Kafkaesque, yes. And I used the word Orwellian, right? Like, let's not have it be opaque. Let's not have it sound like we're just spouting a bunch of confusing mumbo jumbo, but let's be able to show this is the code section we're talking about and have a clear discussion about it. So that's another process step that I would recommend, regardless of what side I'm on in any particular substantive matter. I love the idea of having a debrief at the end of every meeting and really using that and saying, as a way for us to grow as a board together, right? To say something didn't really work for me is not meant to be a character assassination or to be a complaint, more so just this is our opportunity to improve together and do it better next time. So I'll try to do that and be more open about if something didn't really work for me, and I hope that we all will do the same. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is an idea from Macon Coles. He said that when he was on planning board, they always had a show and tell opportunity for matters where if a board member was reading something or had seen something particularly interesting or there was something on your mind, you could bring it up and say, hey, I watched this video and I thought this perfectly encapsulates a dynamic that we're experiencing here in Boulder, or this other jurisdiction is doing this really wild, fun thing that I think could be really applicable or not, and let's think about, do we do it the same or differently, and have a little discussion around that. And I think that in our first couple of years, when three of us who are sitting here tonight, ML and Mark and I, were appointed, our agendas were so full that we didn't have time to breathe. Like sometimes we were adjourning at 1 a.m. And so nobody wanted to do any kind of extra stuff. But our agendas have been a little bit lighter lately. So especially when we have a light meeting, I think it'd be great to do show and tell. Those are my thoughts.
Those are great. Thank you very much. Anyone else with thoughts? Kurt?
This is less about the board process, and maybe it really runs into city council territory, but I was the Landmarks Board liaison, which was a great experience, but it also felt not the best use of everybody's time, and I strongly supported the proposal to eliminate that position. But I do feel, and it occurred to me when Mark brought up TAB, I do feel that there would be significant benefit to having a liaison to TAB, especially when they're doing concept reviews, because I feel like the board, the TAB board, they don't have experience with land use matters, with what is possible, what is not possible, what the process is, and so on. And I think it could be really beneficial to have a liaison to TAB. So I don't know what the process would be for trying to make that happen. Maybe it's just collaring city council members or something. I don't know if it's something that would have to go into the code, but to me, it feels like there's a big opportunity there. So I just want to bring that up.
Kurt, are you proposing that someone from planning board sit in on TAB meetings when TAB is reviewing, doing looking at a land use issue? Or are you saying all the time, or are you saying a TAB member sit in with us, or could you be a little more specific about what your thought is?
No, I can't be more specific because my thought is not more specific. But I think probably the most benefit would be to have a liaison from planning board to TAB for meetings when there is a concept review on the agenda. And yeah, for other times when, they're talking about traffic signals or whatever, then it's not so appropriate. But I'm flexible. I feel that there is potentially a lot of benefit there.
Okay, great. Oh, Hella.
Yeah, I guess I have, you asked, I don't know if that's possible, if that needs a code change. The planning board has sent for many years a liaison to DAB, and that's also not in the code. It doesn't give you an official role. I think the planning board member on the landmarks board and on HAB is an ex officio board member. For DAB, you might be there and might not be able to say anything because you're not actually a board member, but you're there and are able to provide input if that board desires it. So it could be something like that, that you appoint somebody from your board and that person is just available to provide context or answer questions similar to how DAB works.
Yeah, and for landmark board, I don't think that the liaison was an ex officio member because you didn't have voting rights. So it was really just a liaison,
true.
but sitting up at the dais.
Yeah, but it was in the code that a planning board member
Oh, right, that's true.
was supposed to be an ex officio member,
so-
but no voting rights. That's right.
Yeah, okay.
The DAB liaison is not in the code.
Correct.
That's a tradition versus a code item. Interesting. Okay.
Well, I would propose a new tradition.
And maybe that, depending upon if it's nothing more than a new tradition, then maybe there's not a lot to be done other than just do it.
Yeah, you would appoint one of you guys.
Yeah.
Would we need to check with TAB whether they would like that?
Yeah.
Probably should, yeah.
I mean, we
That
could just
seems
assume
fair.
that they would be honored by our presence, but
Yeah, and there was actually a while where the board did appoint a liaison to, I think, a TAB. And I think David Ensign went for a while. And then at some point, he came back and said, I'm not sure this is time worth spending. But it was also before there were regular referrals of concept plans and so on. And only council can refer any Title IX items to TAB. And that didn't used to be a practice, but it's become a practice now.
Okay, Laura.
thank you. Where have we landed with planning board group assignments? Because I know we were rejiggering some of that and saying maybe we don't need a liaison to landmarks. I'm not sure that we made an official decision or where that has landed. I think every year we get a list of here are all the appointments we need to fill for different groups. Are we going to get one of those this year?
Yes.
And so maybe so I was on TAB when David Ensign was the liaison. And as I recall, this is, 4 years ago now, as I recall, there was somebody somewhere kind of pulled him back from that. It wasn't, and he was coming to every meeting, which I think would be unnecessary. It wasn't just on nights that we were doing concept reviews, and during my tenure on TAB, we did that very rarely, and it was only a particular council that started to up the level of involvement because of the prohibition on TAB to weigh in on land use decisions that's written into the code. So, but I think that now that TAB seems to be getting more referrals on land use issues, that when they're referred, then the liaison, a presence of the liaison, I would think TAB would both appreciate and would allow, and it might be helpful in those instances.
So it sounds like the people who have commented are basically in alignment that we should have, or at least offer to have, a liaison to TAB for those meetings where they cross with land use. I think I'm seeing nodding heads that people think that's a good idea, at least most folks. So maybe that's something to propose to TAB. I don't know what the process would be.
One of us could go to a TAB meeting and speak up at the public participation. But I would not advocate for a code change and the process required for a code change, that if what goes on with DAB could go on with TAB, I think that might be completely appropriate given TAB's desire or agreement.
Yeah, one thing to be a little bit careful about is that that's an interaction about an application outside of the actual hearing in front of the planning board for the item.
Okay.
So Hella, would it, if the person who is the liaison understood their role strictly as answering land use questions, not commenting on the application, would that be okay? Or are we wading into territory that we should be very, very cautious about?
I think it would not be within your purview to give an opinion because you would not be there as a member of the TAB board. It would really be more about answering general questions about how a site review process looks, which I guess staff could provide that information as well, and maybe how the board reviews applications and the standards that apply.
But a concept
legally, it would be safest to not attend a meeting that's not the hearing in front
And
of
we
you.
really don't get that many applications referred to TAB by council. I mean, I think we've had a handful in the last couple of years. So.
Yeah.
And concept review is not an approval, it's not a vote. So is it really problematic to be expressing opinions?
I think sometimes it kind of differs how the different applications are being brought forward. Sometimes a concept plan goes to TAB, but sometimes a referral is made by council and the review happens when the site review comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this may have to continue to another night, and as you guys, as staff prepares the list of liaisons, maybe you guys can noodle on that.
Okay.
Okay. Any other items from the board? If not, then I have a couple. And this one I'm going to direct to staff. The first one is, I would really like to have our rules of procedure adopted and in place to help. I think your idea of kind of the checklist, a format that we follow that is helpful to whoever's chairing to make sure we go through everything. But the basis of that would be our adopted rules of procedure. And I know we have adopted rules of procedure now, but I'm really anxious to have the new ones completed and adopted.
I think Laurel's almost done with them because we went over them line by line with the board. So I think it's just another turn at the crank.
Yeah, and identifying a spot on the
And
calendar.
getting them
Maybe we need
adopted.
to. Yeah, we're a little bit short-staffed in our office right now, which has made things difficult
Okay.
overall.
It feels like they're really close.
Yeah,
And,
I think
that-
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so get
No,
out the
but
ready.
we are also eager for them to be updated.
Okay. The other item, two items that, as I've thought about projects we've reviewed as of late, and that is, the first one is, I think we need to refer more projects to DAB. I think for a while we were, and then we haven't in a long time. And for me, I've forgotten at times, and now I look back at certain concept reviews and designs, and I think this is one that I think, I wish DAB could have looked at and helped with. So anyway, I think it's something that we need to keep in mind as we do concept reviews, and to not be shy about that, because DAB might go sometimes 4 or 6 months without a project to review. And I think it's a resource that we haven't been taking advantage of. Kurt?
To clarify, we don't refer projects to DEB, right? Are you talking about recommending that council refer it to DEB?
I thought we did.
You have the authority to refer things to DEB.
Yes.
Oh, I learned something
Yeah.
today.
It's TAB that council has the authority to
Right.
refer things
Yeah.
to.
The council also sometimes refers things to
They do?
DEB,
Yeah,
but we can do it. Oh,
You sure can.
yeah.
you
And a
learn
lot of
something new
applicants,
every day.
frankly, appreciate the review from DAB. They do it electively. They're usually planning on doing it anyway. So
Okay.
Yeah, but
it adds a lot of value, frankly.
Yeah, and there are times where, we had some discussion at recent meetings about doing architecture on the fly and everything, and I think it got me thinking about, gee, we have this resource, let's make better use of it. So, and then the thing that kind of coincides with that is, and it coincides with show and tell. I got a piece in my email from one of the many, planning emails that I get, and it was just a piece about good design and beauty, and the built environment, and what that means to us. And I think that, and our code has some subjective areas in it that refer to good design, materials, etc. And I think we have, and many times we're caught up in the exact number of feet, the length of a wall, or the height, or whatever it might be, the number of square feet of open space, and we lose sight of something that may fulfill the criteria, but is terribly ugly, or may not fulfill every piece of the criteria, which I know we have to have it fulfill the criteria, but some of our criteria is subjective, and it's actually really quite beautiful. And I think, especially at concept review, but in site review as well, we have not talked about design and beauty as much as we might. And I would encourage us to think about that as we review projects. So that's my 2 bits.
So I appreciate you bringing this up, because there have been some projects that don't align with my personal aesthetic. And I have purposefully avoided commenting on it because it isn't in the criteria. And because that is something that's pretty impossible to legislate, right? That everybody has a different opinion about what is ugly and what is cool, right? And so I don't know how we have that conversation, especially in a site review where we're supposed to be applying criteria fairly and consistently. I don't know how we talk about beauty and whether the project is beautiful or not.
Being the only architect on the board here, I absolutely refrain from talking about design and beauty, because I don't think it is in this board's purview to be putting forth either an aesthetic or a direction that sole implication is related to something as really undefinable as beauty. So I would I would not bring it into the board conversation or the board unless we're just saying, hey, this is a cool thing, let's look at it under matters. Fine, there's a lot of amazing stuff going on out there in the world. But I think to try to bring it into our deliberations on projects, I completely disagree that this board has any really right. Because these are architects, these are professionals we're dealing with out there. And, you know, a lot of attention and time goes into the projects. And it really isn't up to us to give direction about how something looks or how something might look that isn't bound back into the criteria that the plans or the zoning or in any of the criteria that we are truly accountable to.
That seems pretty clear to me for site review. For concept review, I was under the assumption, which could be totally wrong, that it was completely within our purview to say things like maybe reconsider this, or consider like the pedestrian experience here, or consider the materials that you're thinking about there, like, and then maybe if it's something beyond that, it's the DAB sort of referral. But in site review, I totally agree. Is that the right understanding? And am I in about the right ballpark?
Charles is nodding.
No, it is. Yeah, I think concept plan, you have a lot more, the criteria in concept plan are designed to be more broad so that you can have those sorts of conversations that are, you know, really more at the conceptual level.
I would just caution us, you know, that again, I'm the only architect on the board, so that isn't the background of this board. And it, just to remember that even when we're having the conversation, that in my personal opinion becomes, I think, a very important sort of disclaimer to put on it, because as Laura pointed out, you know, whether we like something or not, or whether something appeals to our visual sense is debatable. I mean, there is not a black and white deal.
It's subjective. You know, we just always ask that you have those sorts of conversations about building design under the criteria that exist in the site review standards.
Excellent. Thanks, Charles.
Laura?
So just two more points on that. One is I'm just always struck by, there are a lot of buildings in the world that were extremely controversial when they were built, and they are now iconic, like the Gaudi buildings, which is where we get our word gaudy from, but they are world famous, right? And they were hue and cry. People hated them when they were built, or at least some people did. And then the second thing, and I often find my taste changing over time, where something I thought that was really hideous, I'm like, actually, I'm kind of used to that now, and I feel like I like it, you know? So, or vice versa. I really love something, and now I'm like, eh. And then the last point I wanted to make is that I will sometimes in a site review ask applicants about a particular feature and whether it is responsive to our criteria. Like, did you do that because there was something in our criteria that forced you to, or that was a response to something in our criteria? Because I think it does behoove us, if we're seeing outcomes we don't like, to think, are our criteria driving those outcomes, and do we want to rethink those criteria, right? I think that's perfectly appropriate. I don't think it's appropriate to say it, you know, when we're in a site review, I've been pretty clear. I think that my perspective is we have to enforce the criteria that we've got, but if we're not getting the outcomes we want, we should change the criteria for the future.
Okay.
Sorry, a little off topic, but there's a concept in music where it's the ugly that sticks. So every time we've moved past something like tape, that ends up being the thing that gets emulated further down the road. So I don't know, something to look into if you're interested.
And if just from a legal perspective, even if it's just concept review, I would encourage you to stick to the criteria that you will be applying, or what the concept plan review standards, where it's not a standard for approval, but it expects you to address certain things to stay within those parameters. Because if you start talking about what you like or not like, somebody might perceive that as bias towards a project or against a project that might be brought up against later. So it's really best to just stick with in your purview. And it's also good for time management.
Yeah, but those criteria are very broad, though, much more broad than you would see in site review. So I think it affords us the opportunity to have bigger conversations about building design.
Yeah, but within what's described there.
Right,
And-
not about personal feelings about building design.
So I, before making these comments, I sat down and I read 9-2-14A, the purpose of site review. And before I go on and cite just a couple sentences, there are a lot of criteria in the site review that are subjective. Our current entire TDM requirements are subjective. It is to promote, dissuade single occupancy trips, etc. We have a paragraph in there, and it is not numerical. It is entirely subjective, and yet we require a TDM plan, and it's up to this board to decide, does that TDM plan subjectively fulfill the criteria? So we deal with subjectivity in our site reviews frequently. And when you read the purpose, is to allow flexibility in design, encourage innovation in land use development, to enduring human scale building design, buildings that exemplify high quality enduring architecture with facades that are simple and human scaled. Under the purpose, the whole purpose as defined in our code is a whole bunch of subjective criteria. And I think that when we latch on to the numerical things to the neglect of some of the subjective things, we do a disservice to the applicants and to the community as a whole if our sole criteria is this numerical criteria and we don't acknowledge that our criteria has many subjective areas in it.
The thing that I would bring up is we use the BVCPA in that regard as well. It holds a lot of lofty, visionary, desired, but we can't quantify it. We can't qualify it. It doesn't land in a way that says we have to do this in order to get, be in this zone or be in this use or any of those sort of trickle down to a requirement. I used to often read that sort of purpose, and then I started to recognize that it wants to put us in a kind of in a state of mind that bottom line, we want a good city. We want a good city. I don't think we have translated those desires as carefully as they might have been into the numerical. End of the day, the numerical is what we are accountable to. But I think it could be as we work our way through and maybe in the debriefing, we could say, it would be really nice if this criteria could be tweaked in this way. It help us better accommodate, the purpose, because we don't refer to the purpose much in our process. And, I was very excited about the purpose when I first got on the board. And then I realized we don't use it because we don't have a means to use it. So I think it becomes our task to say, how can we create ways in our actual numerical accountability to get some of these other qualities that might not be showing up currently.
Laura.
So I just want to bring us back to, and maybe Charles remembers, Carl would probably remember also, what year was it that we updated the site review criteria? Was that 2 years ago?
21 or 22?
22. I think it was for the three of us who are the oldest serving members, it was like our second year on the board. Kurt, were you there for that? No.
I thought it was one of the first, well, we started one of the first meetings was
Right.
one of our
Right.
virtual meetings that went
That's
till
right.
1 in the morning where we were going
Right.
through the
You're
site
right.
review
You're right.
criteria
Right.
line by
Line by line.
Yeah, that
And it was,
meeting
I think
is-
it was an intense, I'm not going to say traumatic, but it was an intense experience for those of us who were there. And my understanding was that one of the purposes of why we were updating the site review criteria is because applicants and staff felt that there was too much subjectivity and not enough predictability. Because, you know, applicants are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to go through this site review process, and they want to know, if I follow the rules, if I do what you've asked me to, will you approve my project? And so I feel very strongly that we updated those criteria to remove some of the subjectivity and to say, here's what you got to do. Here's the deal. If you do these things, you will get an approval. And if you don't do these things, you will not get an approval, so that they can predict that. And that's one of the reasons why those criteria have been dialed down the way they have. Now, there is still some subjectivity about things like TDM plans, which, as I understand it, staff is currently trying to work on narrowing down or potentially removing. You know, I don't think it's our job to be the 7 arbiters of what code means any more than we have to, right? To the extent that there is ambiguity in the code, then we have to do it. But we should not be deliberately trying to introduce more flexibility or more ambiguity into a process that should be predictable, and it should be consistent, and it should be that an applicant knows if they do these things, they'll get an approval, right? I don't want to go back on that promise that we have made and the whole purpose of why we updated our code. And I remember looking at that purpose section and saying, this isn't what this code does. We need to update the purpose of site review, because our purpose is not to promote artistic creativity and flexibility. Our purpose is to say, here's what it takes to get modifications to your by right zoning, right? Predictably. And that's my view. And maybe not everybody on the board shares that view, but that's where I'm coming from. And I just wanted to introduce that bit of history for people who weren't there.
Kurt?
Just to add to the history, at least as I understand it, and people can maybe correct me, but my understanding is originally there were planned unit developments, right? And that was sort of a way to do a thing that wasn't in the code. And then the site review process was introduced as a sort of a more formalized means of the PUD. And at that time, it really was to promote
The flexibility in design.
the flexibility, right, flexibility of design to encourage innovation in land use development, blah, 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 blah. But then we started saying, well, this isn't a thing that is an optional process for people who want to do something that the current code doesn't allow. Now, it's if you're over 40,000 square feet or whatever the threshold is, boom, you got to do this. And so the process, or the rationale for it really changed. And you're right, we didn't update the purpose. And good thing Carl is gone, because I griped about this when I was on the committee when we were doing the update to the site review criteria, and I complained that these things didn't match. And it is still a problem, and we still have this sort of existential question, I think, of what should be the purpose of site review.
So I'm not trying to get the last word, but I think we're going to conclude here. But I will simply say that I think that the purpose of a review by a board is because there is subjectivity in in the process is designed to be partly subjective. Otherwise, why have a board? Why have a review? You submit your CAD, if you submit your CAD drawings and they fulfill every numerical criteria of a code, then you've simply said, well, we don't need site review because we have a build by right, we have an electronic build by right database that you submit your drawings and the database says yes or no. And I think that would result in some really terrible designs because you might be able to, you can't, even with AI, I don't think you can create a design that fulfills the purpose and subjectivity of a review process. So review processes by their nature are required when you have subjectivity. So my point is, and for me, I will not, just like I can't not see the numerical criteria, I cannot not see the purpose as is stated here in the code. It's clear to me that the purpose of our review process is to adjudicate, and hence quasi-judicial, is to adjudicate the subjective portions of the criteria.
Can I, Mark, respond quickly? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to get the last word either, just for on principle. But I do have a thought about why do we do this, right? And for me, coming from a public policy facilitation background, part of it is transparency with the public. And, you know, Boulder is a wonderful city and a model city in many, many respects, and I'm super glad to live here. And anytime you have a bureaucracy, people are going to suspect things are happening behind closed doors that shouldn't be. And so one of the purposes for, and that's not a comment on Boulder, that is universal. And so for me, one of the purposes of sitting on a board like this and devoting all the countless hours that we do is that we are part of the citizen oversight to say, staff, show us your work, and then we can comment on it and say, do we agree? Because staff is not going to bring us a project that they don't think meets the criteria. Every single project they bring us, they think it meets the criteria or it wouldn't be here. And so we're not here to be a rubber stamp, but we're also not here to try to introduce things that don't exist in the code, right? So yes, words on paper are always going to be subjective, right? Like Hella just had to define for us what does reckless mean in a legal sense, right? So there is some of that interpretation, but I think one of the main purposes that we serve is to fulfill the promise to the public that this is transparent, it's happening in public, and there is citizen oversight over the largest and most impactful developments in our city, for this board in particular.
Anything else? Okay. Well, okay, so I just want to conclude by saying I really enjoyed having this, not just this particular discussion, but our little matters time, and I'd like to continue that, and people should feel free to bring matters up under matters. Okay. All right. Anything else? Any debrief? Here we are at the, now we've gone from matters to debrief. Anyone want to, as if we haven't had enough debriefing, anyone have any comments under debrief?
I'll just say, I think there were a lot of pent up things that we have needed to talk about, and a lot of that came out here and now. And I don't expect that every debrief will be long or every matters item will be long, but I have really appreciated this opportunity to talk with everybody. And I hope we do more of it as well, but maybe not always an hour of it.
Yeah, no, especially on what would have been an early meeting for staff. But anyway, we appreciate you guys staying and hearing our thoughts. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'll adjourn the meeting now. Okay.